My sister-in-law humiliated me for years with cruel comments, but when she invited me to her bachelorette trip and put me in a room with no bed, I exploded and screamed every truth in front of my mother-in-law. Now the entire family abandoned them and they still think they're the victims. I'm 32 years old, married to Jason for about 5 years now, and to this day, I can't believe the amount of unnecessary drama I had to put up with from my sister-in-law Kayla. I mean, this woman literally made my life hell for years just because apparently that's what people who never matured after high school do. And the worst part of it all is that her mom, Ruth, let her be like that her whole life. So when everything finally exploded, it was a monumental disaster that ended with half the family not speaking to each other. But let's start from the beginning, because this was an accumulation of things that happened over years until I reached my limit. The first time I met Kayla was at a family dinner, about 2 months after Jason and I started dating. Jason was super excited for me to meet his little sister. He had talked about her a lot, and I had this image in my head that we were going to be like best friends or something. You know, that whole sister-in-law thing where you get along great. We got to Jason's parents' house, which is a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing spectacular but comfortable, and when we walked in, Kayla was sitting there on the couch with her phone. Jason says, "Kayla, this is Elizabeth." And she looks me up and down with this totally confused face, and says, "Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize you. I thought you were someone else." And I'm standing there like, how are you going to recognize me if you've never seen me in your life? But anyway, I laughed nervously and said something like, "Oh, don't worry, it's the first time we're meeting." And she just says, "Oh, okay," and goes back to her phone. Then during dinner, out of nowhere she goes, "Hey Elizabeth, your makeup looks different. Did you put on something new?" And I literally wasn't wearing any makeup that day because we'd been running errands all morning. I tell her no, actually I'm not wearing anything today. And she makes this face like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," but with a little smile that clearly wasn't genuine. Jason tells me later that Kayla has always been kind of weird with new people, to give her time, that when I got to know her better, it would be different. Spoiler alert, it wasn't different, it was worse. For the next 2 years, literally 2 full years, every time I saw Kayla, it was the same story. She always had some comment about my appearance, but super subtle, like things that if you complained, you seemed like the crazy dramatic one. It was like, "Oh, Elizabeth, your hair looks different today. Did you do something?" Or "I love that you wear that style of clothes." I would never dare to put on something so attention-grabbing, or things like that that technically aren't direct insults, but you know perfectly well they are. And she always did it in front of other people, never when we were alone, like she needed an audience. There were times we'd arrive at a family gathering and she wouldn't even greet me. Literally acted like I was invisible. Would go straight to talk to Jason and leave me standing there like an idiot. Or worse, when I tried to join a conversation, she'd change the subject or turn around with her back to me. It was exhausting. Honestly, because I kept trying to get along with her, thinking it would eventually pass. One day, I mentioned to Jason that his sister was kind of rude to me, not in a bad way, but like to see if he had noticed anything, and that's when he told me the whole story. Turns out Kayla had always been like that. Since high school, one of those girls who had their exclusive little group and who basically bullied other girls in super subtle ways. Ruth, her mom, never said anything to her because Kayla was the baby of the family and could do whatever she wanted without consequences. Jason tells me that Kayla had done the same thing with other cousins' girlfriends, with family friends, with any woman she perceived as a threat or who she just didn't like for some reason that only existed in her head. And the worst part is that Ruth always defended her, always found some excuse like Kayla is very sensitive or she doesn't mean it in a bad way, when it was super obvious she did mean it in a bad way. Jason tells me the best thing I could do was simply ignore her, that he supported me and that I didn't have to put up with her games. So that's what I did. I started ignoring her completely. If we arrived at a gathering and she didn't greet me, I didn't greet her either. If she made some passive-aggressive comment, I would just look at her and not respond at all, or change the subject and keep talking to other people. And it worked amazingly. Like you could tell it irritated her that I wasn't playing her game anymore, because she needed me to react so she could continue with her show. Things were like that for about another year. Relatively calm because we basically didn't interact at all. And I was happy with that arrangement. Jason and I saw his family on special occasions. I was cordial with everyone but kept my distance from Kayla, and everything was fine. And then came the engagement announcement. Kayla was going to marry a guy she'd met about 1.5 years earlier. I think his name was Brad or Brandon, something like that. Honestly, I never paid much attention because I knew that relationship wasn't going to change anything about the family dynamic. When we found out we were at another family dinner, Ruth was super excited, crying and hugging Kayla, and I just said congratulations and that was it, nothing special. I didn't expect at all for Kayla to include me in anything related to the wedding, so I was really surprised when about 2 months later I get a message from her on my phone. The message said something like, "Hi Elizabeth, I know things between us have been weird, but you're my brother's wife and that makes you my family. I would really like you to come on my bachelorette trip so we can spend time together and get to know each other better. I feel like we started off on the wrong foot and I'd like to fix it." And I'm reading this thinking, seriously? After years of treating me like garbage now, she wants to be my friend? But I show the message to Jason, and he gets excited. Tells me that maybe Kayla is maturing, that marriage sometimes makes people reflect, and that I should give her a chance. So I agreed to go, even though I had my doubts. The plan was to drive 6 hours to a spa resort that was in the mountains, something super fancy according to Kayla, and spend the weekend there with her and 2 of her high school friends, Candace and Bethany, who supposedly also wanted to get to know me better. I was trying to be optimistic, thinking that maybe this really was going to be a fresh start, that I was finally going to have a good relationship with my sister-in-law. Jason helped me pack, bought me some nice products to take to the spa, and told me to have fun and send him pictures. Friday, we left early. Kayla picked me up at my house around 7 in the morning with Candace and Bethany in the car, a black SUV that was Ruth's but that Kayla used like it was hers. The first 3 hours of the trip were weird, but not horrible. The 3 of them were in front, and I was in back, and they talked about people I didn't know. But I thought, well, it makes sense. They've been friends for years. Obviously, they're going to have stories I don't understand. I tried a couple times to join the conversation by asking questions or making comments, but it was like they couldn't even hear me. They just continued with their thing. Then we stopped at a gas station to fill the tank and buy snacks. And when we got back to the car, Candace switched to the back seat with me. And I thought, okay, perfect. Now we'll talk. But no, she just put on her headphones and fell asleep. The next 3 hours were exactly the same. The 3 of them up front talking and laughing, and me in back in complete silence feeling like the idiot who paid to be ignored for 6 hours. By the time we got to the resort, I was exhausted, not physically, but mentally, because it was super obvious this wasn't genuine, that something weird was going on. We arrived around 4 in the afternoon, and the place was beautiful, literally one of those resorts you see in magazines with perfect gardens and water fountains and everything decorated super elegantly. We checked in, and Kayla says that Ruth had reserved 2 rooms, one for her and her friends and another for, and she looks directly at me when she says this, for Elizabeth, because we wanted her to have her privacy. And I'm thinking, oh, how nice, how considerate. I have my own room. They give us the keys, and we go up to the 3rd floor. Their rooms were next to each other, and mine was at the end of the hallway. We went into Kayla's room first to leave their things, and it was huge, like a suite with a living room and everything. 2 super nice king-size beds with fluffy white, comforters, and a balcony with a view of the mountains. Then we went to my room, and when we opened the door, I swear I felt my soul drop. There was no bed. The room had a couch, a little table, and nothing else. I tell Kayla, I think there's a mistake. This room doesn't have a bed. And she, with the straightest face in the world, tells me, oh yeah, it's just that Ruth could only pay for 2 rooms with beds, and we thought you could sleep on the floor. We brought sleeping bags in the car. And Candace and Bethany standing there behind her laughing quietly, trying to hide it, but it was super obvious. I stood there frozen, not knowing what to say, like processing if this was really happening or if it was a nightmare. Kayla keeps talking like it's nothing. Says something like, anyway, we're only going to be sleeping. It's no big deal. And besides, this way you save on not having to pay for a bed you're not even going to use. And that's when I realized that this whole trip thing had been planned, specifically to humiliate me, to make me feel bad, to show me that I wasn't part of the group and never was going to be. I walked out of that room without saying anything, went down to the lobby, and the first thing I did was call Jason. It was around 5 in the afternoon. He was leaving work, and when I told him what had just happened, he got furious, like I had never heard him that angry. He tells me, Elizabeth, tell me where the car keys are. And I tell him Kayla has them, and he tells me, get the keys and come home right now. I'll handle the rest. So I went back upstairs, knocked on Kayla's room door, and when she opens, I tell her with the calmest voice I could manage, give me the car keys. She makes that innocent little face like, Why? What's wrong? And I just extend my hand waiting. Candace says something like, "Oh, don't leave. We just got here. Let's make this fun." But I didn't even look at her. Kayla finally gives me the keys with this mocking smile and says, "Say hi to Jason for me," and I grabbed my things and got out of there. The drive back was surreal. 6 hours driving alone on the highway, already getting dark, crying half the time because I couldn't believe the cruelty with which they had treated me. It wasn't even about the bed thing. I mean, yes, that was horrible, but it was more the fact that Kayla had planned all of this, had tricked me into believing she wanted to fix things just to take me all the way there and humiliate me in front of her friends. Who does that? Who is that evil? I got home around 11 at night. Jason was waiting up for me, and he hugged me and told me he had already talked to Kayla on the phone and things had gotten intense. Turns out Jason called Kayla about half an hour after I left the resort and told her absolutely everything he thought about her. He told her she was a spoiled brat, a bully, a cruel and manipulative person who had never matured, and that he wasn't going to her wedding. He told her he was sick of how she treated people, especially his wife, and that Ruth had turned her into a monster by never setting boundaries. Kayla obviously started crying and saying she was just joking, that it wasn't that bad, that I was too sensitive. The whole classic speech from people who bully and don't want to accept responsibility. Jason told her he wasn't interested in her excuses, that what she did was unforgivable, and that he didn't want to see her again until she really changed, which, according to him, was probably never going to happen. And he hung up. I thought that was going to be the end of it all. But no, this was just the beginning of the real chaos. About 20 minutes after Jason hung up, calls and messages started coming to me from Kayla, from Candace, from Bethany, all basically saying the same thing, that how could I have ruined the bachelorette trip, that Jason was missing his sister's wedding because of me, that I was dramatic, that I needed to convince Jason to go to the wedding because it was his family. The messages were ridiculous. Like Candace wrote a super long paragraph saying Kayla was devastated and that this was going to ruin her special day. As if I was the villain of the story, when they had literally treated me like garbage the whole weekend. I blocked all three of them and told Jason to do the same. But then Ruth got involved. Ruth called Jason the next day. It was Saturday morning, and started with the speech about how family is the most important thing. How could he miss his sister's wedding? That Kayla was devastated. That this was a misunderstanding. Jason tried to explain to her what had happened, told her about the room without a bed, about all the years of horrible treatment toward me, but Ruth didn't want to hear any of that. She kept saying I was exaggerating, that Kayla had made a mistake, but it wasn't that bad, that surely it had been a problem with the reservation and not something intentional. Jason told her that was a lie, that it was super obvious it had been intentional, but Ruth just kept defending Kayla. The conversation ended with Ruth crying and saying Jason was disappointing her. The calls didn't stop. During that whole week, Ruth kept calling, leaving really long voicemails where she basically blamed me for everything. Said I had put ideas in Jason's head, that I was trying to separate the family. Things like that's super unfair. I wasn't even answering her calls, but I could hear the messages, and it was frustrating because she was painting the whole situation as if I was the bad guy in the movie. Jason was also still getting messages from relatives asking what had happened, because apparently Kayla and Ruth had told them their version of the story where I was the crazy one who had gotten offended over nothing, and who had convinced Jason not to go to the wedding. One Wednesday night, like 11 at night, Jason gets up from bed, gets dressed, and tells me he's going to talk to his mom. I tell him it's 11 at night, that he should do it tomorrow. But he was determined. He drove about 30 minutes to Ruth's house and knocked on the door until she came out. I don't know exactly what they said because Jason didn't tell me all the details, but basically it was a confrontation where he made it very clear to her that he wasn't going to tolerate her continuing to defend Kayla's behavior, that as a mother she had completely failed in teaching her daughter to be a good person, and that if Ruth couldn't see how toxic Kayla had become, then he didn't want to have a relationship with her either. Ruth told him that if he didn't go to the wedding, then the whole family was going to cut contact with him, like a super dramatic threat of, if you're not with us, you're against us. Jason told her to do whatever she wanted and came back home. The wedding was in 2 weeks, and things only got worse. Kayla and Ruth were apparently telling everyone that Jason and I were horrible people who were trying to ruin the most important day of Kayla's life. Some relatives stopped talking to us. Others sent us messages asking for our version, but like they already had their opinion formed. It was exhausting having to explain over and over what had happened, and even so many didn't believe us or said we were exaggerating. The Friday before the wedding, like 6 in the morning, there's a knock on our door. I was ready to leave for work. Jason had already left about half an hour earlier because he had to go in early that day, and when I opened the door, there are Ruth and Kayla standing there, with faces like they hadn't slept. Ruth immediately starts with, "We need to talk to Jason. Where is he?" And I tell her he already left for work. Kayla says they need to see him urgently, that the wedding is in 2 days, and they have to resolve this. I honestly was already fed up with the whole situation. I had been putting up with their calls, their messages, their smear campaign in the family for weeks. And seeing them standing there at my door at 6 in the morning demanding to see my husband was the straw that broke the camel's back. I told them Jason didn't want to talk to them, to please leave. But Ruth started with the speech that I was the one manipulating Jason, that before I showed up they were a happy family, and Kayla there behind her nodding, like everything her mom said was true. And that's when I exploded. I yelled at them, literally yelled, that Kayla was a liar, a manipulator, a high school bully who never grew up, and that everything that was happening to her was a consequence of her own actions. I told Ruth she was a terrible mother who had raised an insufferable daughter because she never set boundaries for her, that she always defended her no matter how horrible she behaved, and that now she was reaping what she sowed. I told Kayla she was an insecure person who needed to humiliate other women to feel good about herself, that she was pathetic, and that I wasn't going to continue being her punching bag just because she had unresolved issues. I told them to get off my property and not to approach me or Jason again, and I closed the door in their faces. I stood there shaking, with my heart beating super fast, processing that I had just said all those things to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Part of me felt bad because I had never been so direct and aggressive with anyone, but another part felt liberated, like I had finally taken a huge weight off my shoulders. I called Jason to tell him what had happened, and he started laughing, told me he was proud of me, that someone had to tell them their truths. Later, he told me that Ruth sent him a message saying I had insulted her horribly and that he needed to control his wife. To which Jason responded that she should stop playing the victim and get therapy because she clearly needed it. The wedding happened. Obviously, neither Jason nor I went. And I thought everything was finally going to calm down. But no. Because Kayla apparently mentioned me in her speech during the reception. We found out from a cousin of Jason's who did go and who later sent us a message telling us about it. According to the cousin, Kayla gave this super dramatic speech about how her brother wasn't there because of his dramatic wife, that she had tried to make peace with me but I was impossible, that I had ruined the moment of family unity she wanted to have on her bachelorette trip, basically painting herself as the saint and me as the villain. And the cousin says it was super awkward because a lot of people there knew there was another version of the story, but Kayla made it all about her and her supposed suffering. But here's where the story gets good. Turns out several relatives who hadn't been on the trip or didn't really know what had happened started asking questions, asking for details, and some called Jason directly to ask for his version. Jason told them everything, from the years of passive-aggressive abuse to the room without a bed, and little by little the real story started to come out. An aunt, Jason's dad's sister, called Ruth to ask if it was true about the room, and Ruth tried to justify it, saying it had been a problem with the reservation. But the aunt didn't believe her because it was too convenient. Other cousins started sharing their own stories of times Kayla had been cruel to them or their partners, and suddenly, this super clear pattern of toxic behavior formed that nobody could deny anymore. Within about 3 weeks after the wedding, Kayla and Ruth were basically isolated from the rest of the family. The aunt organized a family gathering without inviting them, and there Jason and I were able to tell our complete version without interruptions. When we finished, several relatives apologized to us for not believing us before, admitted they had always seen Kayla's behavior but never wanted to say anything to avoid drama. Some even shared that they had stopped going to certain family gatherings specifically to not have to deal with Kayla and her games. It was validating to hear that we weren't the only ones who had experienced her toxicity. Now, it's been about 8 months since all that. Kayla and Ruth are still married to the idea that they're the victims of this situation, but most of the family doesn't talk to them anymore or only maintains minimal contact. Jason and I live peacefully, without drama, without having to walk on eggshells every time there's a family gathering. It's weird because on one hand I feel like I should feel bad that the family split up like that, but on the other hand it was necessary. You can't maintain family peace when that peace requires someone to endure constant abuse. Ruth still sends Jason occasional messages trying to get him to reconcile, But he's already made it clear that until Kayla accepts what she did and genuinely apologizes, which will probably never happen, there's nothing to talk about. And I totally agree with that.